So, what's going on in Job 40? To set up the conversation that's happening here, the Lord is speaking with Job, and Job has been suffering, man. Job has been going through it. His children have died. He's been incredibly sick. Satan is putting him through the ringer. That's really what's going on. And his friends, who are not very good friends, are essentially blaming Job. And Job is defending himself. He's saying, "Look, I'm not guilty of these things that you're accusing me of. I'm really not. And I don't deserve to have this happen to me." We get this back and forth for 38 chapters. And then the Lord actually shows up, and the Lord speaks to Job out of a whirlwind, literally out of a hurricane. And here's what he says. First, in chapter 38, God starts going through and describing all these natural processes. Job, can you make the sun rise? Job, do you know where the treasury of the snow is hidden? Job, do you keep the stars in the sky? Are you overseeing the stars in the constellations like Orion? And of course, the answer to all these questions is no. Well, then in chapter 39, the Lord starts listing animals, and he lists and describes in vivid, epic detail. He talks about the wild ox, he talks about horses, he talks about lions. These are all real world animals. And then in chapter 40, right in that string of real world animals, that God is saying, "Look, Job, can you provide for all these animals? I can." Then Job is confronted by this description of the behemoth. Now, what is the behemoth? Whatever it is, it's big. Why do we know it's big? Well, from its description, but also the very fact that it's called behemoth. Behemoth is a plural noun. Now, I'm not a Hebrew scholar, but one thing I do know about Hebrew is that sometimes in Hebrew, a plural noun is used to describe something big and grand. I'll give you two examples. One, in the Bible, in the Hebrew, the sky is described as the heavens. And I know that you could say there are three heavens. There's the sky, there's what we would consider to be outer space, and then there's the heaven of heavens where God dwells. But the idea is, you look up at the sky, we even say this today, don't we? We talk about, there's clear skies today. We're not saying that there are multiple skies. We're just saying we're using a plural noun to describe something big and grand. The word for God, Elohim, in the original language, is a plural noun that literally means gods, but of course we know there is only one God. The same Bible that calls God Elohim also says there is one God. But it's a plural noun being used to describe something, in this case someone, big and grand. Now here you've got this plural noun to describe behemoth. Behemoth is big. Behemoth is grand. And they use a plural noun to describe him. Let's see what it says. Here we have Job chapter 40, verses 15 to 24. Behold, behemoth, which I made as I made you. Literally, the Hebrew there is with you. He eats grass like an ox. Behold his strength in his loins, and his power in the muscles of his belly. He makes his tail stiff like a cedar. The sinews of his thighs are knit together. His bones are tubes of bronze. His limbs like bars of iron. He is the first of the works of God. Let him who made him bring near his sword. For the mountains yield food for him, where all the wild beasts play. Under the lotus plants he lies, in the shelter of the reeds and in the marsh. For his shade, the lotus trees cover him, the willows of the brook surround him. Behold, if the river is turbulent, he is not frightened. He is confident, though Jordan rushes against his mouth. Can one take him by his eyes or pierce his nose with a snare? So at first blush, you read this and you say, that sounds like it's describing maybe a hippopotamus. In fact, I remember reading the Bible when I was a kid. Certain translations, I don't remember which one, maybe the NIV, would say behemoth, a little footnote at the bottom, it would say possibly a hippopotamus. Let me tell you something. A hippopotamus is big. A hippopotamus is strong. But a hippopotamus does not have a tail like a cedar. Last time I checked, there's no hippopotamus that has that. But you know what does have a tail like a cedar? A sauropod. A sauropod, like a brachiosaurus or an apatosaurus, has a tail stiff as a cedar. And as I was talking about this with my son this morning, or with my kids, my son Jacob brought something up. When we first discovered dinosaurs in the modern era in the 1800s, the general conception was that they dragged their tails behind them. They were seen as these big, lumbering, doofy creatures that had tails that swung low and dragged on the ground. Well, we now know that dinosaurs use their tails as a counterbalance, and they actually held their tails stiff. So, what God is describing to Job here sounds like an actual description of the way a sauropod would move. You could imagine it laying low among the reeds. Even to this day, again, we're not going to really get into this, but even today, there are legends and folk tales and even some eyewitness accounts of a creature called Mokele Mabembe that lives in Africa, that lives in the swamps and is very hard to observe, but it lives low in the swamps and it sort of hides. And so the description kind of matches. What I'm saying is the description matches this behemoth. And when people describe it, they say it's got a long neck. Anyway, all that to say, behemoth very well could be a sauropod. It could be another creature like an ankylosaurus, something along those lines. But one thing it can't be is a hippopotamus. Now, someone might push back and say, look, Joel, this is describing a mythical creature. Here's why I don't buy that. The way that Job 40 starts off, God says to Job, he says, behold behemoth, which I made with you, or which I made as I made you. It depends on how you translate that. If this were a mythical creature, why would God say that he made the creature and that he made it along with Job? That would be like, speaking of Lord of the Rings, that would be like someone saying, one thing I always try to avoid is a cave troll. Or if God were to come to you and say, I made the cave troll along with you, or I made the Balrog along with you. Sure, the Balrog or the cave troll, these are great images of evil, but they're not real. And if God were to say, I made these creatures or these entities along with you, man, God would not be telling the truth. But here we've got God saying exactly that about the behemoth.